Have you ever stopped to really uh, think about your dining room? It's so much more than just the place where we happen to eat, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a space that's, evolved so dramatically, and it holds a surprising amount of, well, cultural weight.
And that's exactly what we're plunging into today, this deep dive.
Hmm.
We're going to explore the really fascinating history, the often unspoken rules of etiquette, the diverse cultural
And
meanings.
even the subtle power dynamics, right?
Yeah.
All within this seemingly ordinary space, the dining room.
Exactly.
We've drawn on a really interesting mix of sources for this one.
Yeah.
Everything from ancient texts, historical accounts.
All the way to
and-
modern sociological observations about how we live and interact today. Yeah.
Yeah.
So our goal here is really to unpack all those layers of meaning, the stuff we often just take for granted, in our dining rooms, our eating habits.
Hmm. And hopefully uncover some pretty unexpected insights into our past, our present.
And maybe even what makes us tick when it comes to this like central space in our lives.
Right.
Okay, let's dive right in. Starting at the beginning, how did the dining room even come to be?
Well, it's fascinating, actually, because the whole idea of a dedicated dining space,
Yeah.
it hasn't always been the norm at all. Think about ancient Rome, for instance.
Rome. Okay.
Formal meals often took place in something called a triclinium.
A triclinium. Okay, that sounds quite different from our dining setup today. What was the key difference there?
The defining feature really was the couches. They were arranged specifically for, well, reclining while eating.
Reclining while eating a formal meal.
Imagine that. A
Mm.
social formal meal experienced lying down. It really highlights how much our customs have, shifted towards the upright posture we associate with dining now.
Wow.
But even back then, having this dedicated space, even with couches, shows the importance they placed on the ritual of eating together.
Reclining. That's quite a contrast. So, okay, moving forward a bit, medieval Europe. What did meal times look like then? Was it still reclining?
No reclining then, mostly. For the nobility, at least, large gatherings for meals usually happened in the Great Hall.
The Great Hall, I picture like castles and long tables.
Pretty much. And crucially, this wasn't a room just for dining. It served many purposes. But what's particularly telling is how the seating arrangements clearly display the social hierarchy.
Ah, okay. How so?
Well, the Lord and his family would be up on a raised platform, a dais, and everyone else. They were seated according to their rank within the household. Your proximity to the head table literally mirrored your standing.
So your status dictated not just where you sat, but if you even sat near the important people.
Exactly. It wasn't until later that we start seeing the emergence of private dining chambers for the nobility, allowing for maybe more intimate meals. It was a slow step towards the dedicated dining room we recognize.
Got it. So a gradual shift. Okay, so when did the dining room as like a distinct room in the house really start to appear?
The 18th century was pretty pivotal. That's when the dining room began to solidify its place as a separate room within the home.
Was that just about like organization?
Practicality definitely played a role. It was often situated close to the kitchen, which makes sense. But then, especially in Victorian England, it acquired this whole other layer of significance.
Okay, and what was that significance? More than just eating.
Oh, much more. It became a real symbol of a family's social standing.
Yeah.
Having a formal dining room, maybe only used for specific occasions, communicated a certain level of, wealth and social aspiration.
Right. It wasn't just about feeding yourselves, it was about showing off a bit.
Precisely. Displaying your place in society through your house layout.
Interesting how a room can speak volumes about a family. And then fast forward again, 20th century, we've seen another pretty big shift in how we design our living spaces, haven't we?
Absolutely. The rise of open concept designs really blurred those lines. Dining areas started merging much more seamlessly with kitchens, living rooms.
Yeah, you see that everywhere now.
And that trend really reflects a more informal lifestyle, I think. A different way of thinking about how we use our homes, how we interact. It's definitely a move away from that rigid formality of the Victorian era. More integrated, more casual.
It's fascinating to trace that path, from reclining Romans to these open-plan kitchens we have now. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about something that's evolved right alongside these spaces. Dining etiquette, the rules, the rituals, where did all that start?
Well, the whole idea of having established rules and customs around eating, It's actually incredibly ancient. We can find some of the earliest known examples of like table etiquette in texts like the Book of Sirach.
When was that?
That dates back to around the 2nd century BCE. So yeah, a very long history.
Wow. Okay, so people have been telling each other how to eat properly for millennia. What about closer to our, more familiar Western history, medieval times again?
Definitely. In medieval Europe, especially within the royal courts, dining etiquette was incredibly detailed, highly structured.
More than just which fork to use, I imagine.
Oh, much more. It wasn't just about the mechanics of eating. It was deeply tied into reinforcing that social order we talked about. Procedures like ritualistic hand washing before meals, very specific seating charts. It was all integral to maintaining that structure. Hierarchy again.
It sounds incredibly formal, almost stressful. The way food was even served have its own set of rules.
Absolutely. Different styles of service developed over time, and they each reflected different priorities, different social norms. One really prominent style is called service à la française, French service.
Okay, service à la française. What did that look like?
So in this method, all the different dishes prepared for a meal were presented on the table pretty much simultaneously at the same time.
All at once.
Yep. And guests would then serve themselves from this, huge array of food. Imagine the visual impact, a table just laden with everything.
That sounds like quite the feast laid out all at once, almost like a grand buffet. How did that differ from what we, typically experience in a formal setting today?
It's quite a contrast, actually. The style that has largely shaped modern Western dining is known as service à la Russe, Russian service.
Service à la Russe. Okay.
This was introduced mostly in the 19th century, and it involves serving dishes sequentially, course by course.
Ah, okay. So appetizer, then soup, then main. That sort of thing.
Exactly that. This approach, where the food is often portioned by servers and brought out in stages, that's the model most restaurants and formal dinners tend to follow today.
Why the shift? Any idea?
Well, the shift likely reflected changing ideas about, maybe, efficiency, temperature control of food, perhaps a greater emphasis on the individual guest's experience rather than just the spectacle of the whole table.
Interesting how those serving styles evolved and what they might tell us about societal shifts. Now, obviously, the way we eat isn't the same everywhere, is it? Let's explore some of the fascinating cultural variations in dining practices around the world.
Oh, this is where you see the really rich tapestry of human culture woven into something as fundamental as eating. It's amazing. Take the Filipino tradition of kamayan, for example.
Kamayan, what does that involve?
This often involves communal feasts where people eat directly with their hands.
With their hands?
Yes, from a shared pile of food, often laid out beautifully on banana leaves. No individual plates, no utensils for the main part of the meal.
Eating with your hands together. What's the significance of that kind of communal meal?
It's seen as a really powerful way to build intimacy, connection, a sense of equality among the diners. It kind of strips away some of the formality that comes with utensils and really emphasizes the shared experience of nourishment.
That sounds lovely, actually. Very direct.
It's a very direct, tactile way of connecting with both the food and the people you're sharing it with.
That's a beautiful sentiment. Okay, what about a culture with maybe a very different approach? China, for instance. Banquets there seem quite significant.
Chinese banquets definitely have their own distinct and very important customs. Hierarchical seating is often significant, again reflecting social standing, and crucially, respect for elders.
So elders get the best seats.
Often, yes, or seats of honor. There are also specific rituals, like toasting protocols and the practice of serving elders before others. That underscores social order and filial piety.
Right. And the food itself?
The emphasis on shared dishes is key. Everyone takes portions from central platters. That fosters a real sense of community around the meal. It's not about individual plates arriving pre-portioned.
So while the biological need to eat is universal, the ways we organize that act and the meanings we layer onto it are just incredibly diverse.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember, too, these aren't static traditions frozen in time. Dining practices everywhere are constantly evolving. Traditional customs often blend with contemporary lifestyles, especially with societal changes and, globalization bringing different influences together.
Constantly changing. Okay, let's move into some of the maybe less tangible aspects, the psychological and philosophical dimensions of the dining room. It's clearly more than just a physical space with a table and chairs, right?
Precisely. The dining room really acts as a kind of stage for our social interactions. The rituals we perform there, whether it's everyday family dinners or more formal gatherings, They play a vital role in reinforcing our family bonds, our sense of belonging to a particular culture.
You mentioned rituals reinforcing bonds. Can you give us a specific example, like how seemingly small dining ritual can have a deeper meaning?
Sure. Think about a common etiquette rule like not taking the very last serving of food from a shared dish without asking.
Oh, yeah, they don't take the last piece rule.
Exactly. On the surface, it seems like just simple politeness, right? But it also carries this symbolic weight of consideration for others, the idea of communal sharing, making sure everyone has had enough before you take the final bit.
That makes perfect sense. It's like a micro agreement to consider the group, not just yourself.
It's a small act that speaks to a larger value of communal harmony.
And I know there are thinkers who have really explored the deeper philosophy behind our eating habits, people
Right.
who've studied this specifically.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
The work of philosopher Margaret Visser is particularly insightful here. She argues that these very dining rituals, the etiquette, the structure, that's what elevates the basic biological act of eating into a meaningful social event.
So it's the ritual that adds the meaning.
She suggests it imbues our meals with cultural significance that goes far beyond simply satisfying hunger. It's the framework, the how we eat, that adds so much to the experience.
So it's the how we eat that gives so much depth to the why of gathering around food. Okay, that's really interesting. Now, bringing our focus to the present day, what are some of the contemporary ways we're thinking about and using our dining rooms? How do they look now?
Well, today we see a really wide spectrum, don't we, in how dining spaces are conceived and used. You've got the very formal dining rooms, perhaps really only used for holidays or special occasions, kind of preserved in amber.
Right, the room you're not allowed in most of the year.
Uh-huh. Maybe. And then at the other end, you have the increasingly common integrated dining areas, the ones that just flow seamlessly within open-plan living spaces, maybe just a designated part of the kitchen or living room.
Yeah, much more fluid.
And this variety, it really reflects the diverse lifestyles and values we hold today. There isn't just one way anymore.
And I think recent global events have even shown a new light on how we interact with these spaces, haven't they? The pandemic, for instance.
Oh, the COVID-19 pandemic certainly underscored the adaptability of the dining room, didn't it? Suddenly, these spaces were being repurposed all over the place.
Yeah, my dining table was my office for about 2 years.
Exactly. Makeshift home offices, temporary classrooms. When the traditional venues for those things were just inaccessible, it really highlighted their potential for multiple uses beyond just eating.
It really forced us to reconsider the functionality of pretty much every room in our homes. Now, earlier you touched on the idea of hierarchy in historical dining settings, like the Great Hall. And it made me wonder, does the dining table itself still function as a kind of power structure, even today?
Oh, absolutely. In many settings, both formal and maybe even informal, historically and today, the seating arrangements at a dining table can subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, signal power dynamics and status.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. Where you sit still holds significance, even at, like, a family dinner.
It definitely can. The position at the head of the table, for instance, is often traditionally associated with a figure of authority.
Like the dad, historically.
Often the patriarch, yeah, or maybe the matriarch, or the host at a formal dinner. Similarly, in more elite social circles or even business dinners, the closer your seat is to the host or the most senior person.
The more important you seem.
It could be perceived that way, yes.
Yeah.
That your presence is valued or important. It's a kind of visual cue within the social interaction.
That's fascinating. Almost a silent language of status played out around the table. And I remember reading that even the shape of the table itself can contribute to this, right?
Precisely. Think about the symbolism of a round table.
King Arthur.
Exactly. Famously associated with King Arthur and his knights. The circular shape inherently suggests equality among those seated. There's no single position that holds obvious dominance.
Everyone's equidistant from the center.
Right. Now contrast that with a long rectangular table. That shape inherently creates more of a visual hierarchy. Those at the ends often hold more perceived authority, or they become the focal points of attention naturally.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's worth reflecting on how even the seemingly simple geometry of the table can influence the distribution of perceived power within that room.
It's almost like the furniture itself has a voice in the social dynamics. Wild. Okay, shifting gears slightly. It feels like, anecdotally at least, that the traditional image of the whole family gathered around the dining table every night. That seems less common now. Is that a real trend?
Research does seem to indicate a decline, yeah. A decline in the frequency of shared family meals, especially over the past century or so.
Any idea why? Just busy lives.
Several factors seem to be contributing. Things like the rise of more individual eating habits, facilitated by TV trays, eating in front of screens, solo dining.
Right.
Also, more varied and often staggered meal times because of busy, conflicting schedules for parents and kids. And just the increasing prevalence of eating on the go, grabbing something quick.
It does make you wonder about the impact of those changes, losing that regular gathering point.
Indeed. And studies have actually linked regular shared meals with some really positive outcomes, especially for kids and teenagers.
Like what?
Things like better academic performance, lower reported rates of anxiety and depression, and also stronger family bonds, and just the simple transmission of family stories and traditions.
So there's potential cost to that convenience.
It seems so. You could argue that in a world that often emphasizes hyper-individualism, the dining room, or at least the shared meal, can represent a really valuable, maybe even rare space for collective experience and focused attention on each other.
A last bastion of unity, perhaps. Okay, now, sometimes hosting a meal, especially a more formal one in the dining room, it can feel a bit like putting on a show. Is there a sense of hospitality theater involved?
Oh, absolutely. The dining room can definitely become a stage for what we might term hospitality theater. That sounds about right.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, it involves all the conscious and often quite performative aspects of hosting. Carefully selecting matching tableware, maybe worrying about wine pairings, engaging in polite, sometimes slightly, scripted conversation.
Keeping the conversation flowing, making sure everyone's happy.
Exactly. It's about consciously creating a particular experience for your guests, crafting an event.
And I imagine that comes with its own set of expectations, maybe even pressures.
It often does, yeah. Including the pressure to create a seemingly flawless, perfect experience. And that pressure can sometimes fall disproportionately on one person.
Traditionally, the woman of the house, the hostess.
Often reinforcing those traditional gender roles, yes. Think about the stark contrast between, say, a really casual weeknight dinner pizza at the kitchen counter maybe versus a more elaborate hosted dinner.
Yeah, place settings, multiple courses, maybe even formal toasts.
Right. It prompts us to consider, what are we really communicating and enacting in those very different scenarios? What's the performance about?
That's a great question.
Ultimately, you could say every dining event, regardless of its formality, operates as a kind of social script. It has defined roles, certain expected rituals, and a lot of unspoken expectations floating around.
A social script played out around the table. I like that framing. Now, our dining spaces, they aren't just for everyday meals or even fancy dinner parties, are they? They often hold really significant meaning within religious and cultural observances, too.
That's a crucial point, absolutely. Dining rooms, or just dining tables, frequently serve as central locations for moments of both ritualized abundance feasting and sometimes deliberate restraint, like fasting, within various religious and cultural contexts.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Think about the huge feasts associated with Thanksgiving in the U.S. and Canada, or the symbolic foods in order of the Passover Seder in Judaism, the breaking of the fast during Ramadan, with communal iftar meals in Islam, even the mindful silence often practiced during Buddhist meals, or the offering and sharing of blessed food, prasad, in Hindu traditions.
So in those moments, the dining room really takes on a kind of sacred dimension. It's more than just a room.
Exactly. The space itself can transform. It becomes imbued with deeper spiritual or cultural significance, especially during those big annual commemorations or important rites of passage.
Rites of passage, like what?
Things like meals after funerals, wakes, wedding receptions, milestone birthday celebrations. In those instances, the table can almost function like an altar, in a way. And the food itself can take on the symbolic weight of a sacrament, connecting people to tradition, to shared belief, to memory.
That's a powerful way to think about it, the table as a focal point for something much larger than just eating. Now, thinking about who even has a dedicated dining room, it strikes me that it's often a bit of a luxury, isn't it? Not a universal feature of every home.
You're absolutely right to point that out. The formal, separate dining room, architecturally speaking, is often a marker of a certain level of affluence. It's a feature that might be less common in more modest dwellings or in dense urban living situations where space is just at a premium.
Right. And historically, there's another layer of inequality to consider when we talk about dining spaces, isn't there? Who's doing the work?
Undeniably. We really have to acknowledge the historical reality, and in some places it's still a contemporary reality, that domestic workers, servers, and tragically, historically enslaved people They often played the absolutely crucial role of preparing and serving the food.
But they weren't eating with the people they served.
Exactly. They were excluded from the act of dining with those they served. The dining room, in that context, becomes a really stark symbol of social division, economic disparity, power imbalance.
That's a very sobering but important reminder of the social dynamics embedded in these seemingly neutral spaces and those inequalities. They can still manifest in different ways today, can't they? Around access.
They certainly do. Issues of food insecurity in our contemporary world, for example, contribute to what we might observe as kind of segmented food systems.
Segmented how?
Well, on one end, you might have access to organic, locally sourced ingredients, the time for leisurely sit-down meals,
Right.
things often associated with more privileged lifestyle.
The slow food movement kind of thing.
Right. And then on the other end, you might see a greater reliance on fast food, grab-and-go options, often driven by time constraints, economic realities, maybe living in food deserts.
So the dining room itself, or the lack of one, or just the time to use it?
It becomes more than just a physical space.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of indicative of who has the resources and the time to pause, to partake, to connect in that way,
Yeah.
and who is constantly on the move, needing to hustle.
It really highlights how something as fundamental as eating is still deeply intertwined with these broader social and economic structures. Okay, now, something that's definitely impacting things today is technology. The way we engage with our meals has been significantly altered. It's so common to see people eating while looking at screens. How does that trend impact the traditional role of the dining room as a space for, connection?
Yeah, the rise of screen-based eating, whether it's the TV running, scrolling through social media on a phone, even working on a laptop during a meal, it undeniably challenges that historical purpose of the dining room or the mealtime itself as a primary space for face-to-face interaction, for shared experience.
It's like we're inviting distractions right into the middle of it.
It certainly seems that way. We're dividing our attention. It's interesting, philosophers like Epicurus, way back, actually emphasized the importance of savoring food in good company, engaging in thoughtful conversation. They saw it as essential elements of a fulfilling life.
So connection during meals was key.
For him, yes. And then conversely, you have mindfulness teachers like, say, Thich Nhat Hanh in more recent times, who advocate for the practice of silent, mindful eating.
Silent eating.
Yes, encouraging us to fully focus on the sensations, the chewing, the tasting, and cultivating gratitude for the nourishment itself, without external distractions, sometimes even without conversation.
So two very different approaches to being present with food.
Both emphasizing presence, just in different ways. And this really raises a pertinent question for our time, doesn't it? Can we intentionally reclaim the dining room or our meal times as spaces of focused attention, genuine connection? Maybe free from the constant pull of our digital devices?
Yeah.
Or is that battle lost?
That's a really powerful question to consider in our tech-saturated world. Definitely food for thought. Okay, finally, let's just touch briefly on the more sensory aspects of the dining room. I've often noticed how the environment itself, the lighting, the sounds, can really influence the eating experience.
Oh, absolutely. And research in environmental psychology has uncovered some fascinating connections there between the physical characteristics of a dining space and our actual eating behaviors.
Like what kind of things?
For instance, studies suggest that warmer lighting and the use of round tables, back to the table shape again, tend to encourage longer meal times, potentially more conversation among diners.
Interesting. And the opposite.
Conversely, the deliberate use of cooler, maybe brighter lighting and harder, less comfortable seating. That's often a design choice in many fast food establishments. The thinking is it encourages quicker eating, faster turnover of tables.
That makes perfect sense when you think about the different goals of those spaces. One wants you to linger, the other wants you out.
Precisely. And then we have the often overlooked role of just the sensory rituals, the little things that enhance our dining experience.
You mean like?
The gentle clinking of silverware, the comforting aroma of a home-cooked meal filling the space, even the tactile sensation of a linen tablecloth versus, say, a wipe-clean plastic one. These sensory cues, they can evoke really strong feelings of familiarity, comfort, even nostalgia. They contribute hugely to the overall enjoyment and meaning of the meal.
It's not just taste then.
Not at all. So the dining room isn't simply a utilitarian space for consuming calories. It's truly a multisensory environment, a sort of symphony of senses that shapes our whole experience.
Wow, this has been such an enlightening deep dive into something we really do often take for granted, the dining room. It's incredible to see how much history, culture, psychology, even power dynamics are all wrapped up in this seemingly simple
It
space.
really is multifaceted.
So, for our listener, as you think about your own dining room, or maybe just your main eating space, perhaps take a moment to consider some of these questions. Like, what role does that space play in your daily life? Is it central? Is it peripheral?
And how do your dining practices, the way you eat, reflect your cultural background or maybe your upbringing? Are there specific traditions you follow?
How has the function of your dining space changed over time, maybe even just in the last few years? And who typically gets to, say, initiate any blessings or acknowledgments before meals if that happens in your house?
Yeah, or are there unspoken or maybe very spoken rules about phones or other devices during meal times? Is that a point of discussion?
Does everyone usually eat together at the
Huh?
same time, or do schedules mean it's more often staggered individual eating patterns?
What's one of your earliest or maybe just most vivid memories that took place at a dining table? Does one stand out?
And thinking about what we discussed, how do your eating habits or the way you dine maybe reflect aspects of your upbringing or even your class or socioeconomic background?
Have you ever actually experienced dining in complete silence, either intentionally, like in a retreat, or just unintentionally? What was that experience like for you?
That's a really interesting one, and maybe a bit whimsical. If your dining room or your eating space could somehow talk, what do you think it would reveal about your family or the guests you welcome? What stories would it tell?
Ah, yeah, what secrets does it hold?
And finally, maybe looking forward, what do you wish happened more frequently around your table? Conversely, is there anything you wish happened less often?
Hmm, good questions for reflection.
Perhaps the dining room, then, in all its diverse and evolving forms, maybe it really does remain this powerful stage. A stage for some of the most fundamental aspects of being human, our deep need for connection, the comfort and structure of ritual, and even that subtle ongoing dance of power and status. The question is, what role will it play in your life moving forward?